Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, simmering tensions turn deadly. A long-standing territorial rift between Armenia and Azerbaijan comes to a head-on along their border, leaving at least 30 soldiers dead. Can the violence be contained? And Qingming tomb sweeping day. Join us for a discussion on tradition and ceremony as families across China honor their deadly departed. And we begin today's program in the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region between Azerbaijan and Armenia. It's said the clashes on Saturday are the worst in 2 decades. At least 30 soldiers and some civilians are dead. Neighbors and related organizations have called for a de-escalation, but how to solve this long-running conflict remains in question because Russia, European countries, and other involved nations all have their own considerations. Take a look at this.
Simmering tensions turned deadly. Tanks, artillery, and helicopters. Dozens of people were killed in the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh between Azerbaijan and Armenia on Saturday. Early on Sunday, Azerbaijan claimed a ceasefire, but said it will continue fighting if Armenian troops remain in the Nagorno-Karabakh region.
We won't abandon our principal position, but at the same time we observe the ceasefire, and after that we will try to solve the conflict peacefully. We are fighting on our own territory. If an Armenian soldier does not want to die, then let him get off Azerbaijani territory.
However, Armenia said the fighting will continue. At least 18 ethnic Armenian troops have died in the new conflict.
The enemy used air force, all types of artillery and military APCs of all types. Enemy's losses both among its air force, infantry and artillery are multiple. We also have lost people. For now we have 18 people killed and 35 injured.
The Russian Defense Ministry has spoken with Armenian and Azeri counterparts by phone in an effort to calm the situation. The Nagorno-Karabakh region is inside Azerbaijan, but its population is mainly ethnic Armenian. After the end of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the new Soviet rulers established the Nagorno-Karabakh as an autonomous region within the Soviet Socialist Republic of Azerbaijan in the early 1920s. At the end of the 1980s, Armenian-Azeri frictions exploded into violence after the region's parliament voted to join Armenia as Soviet control loosened. When the Soviet Union broke up in late 1991, Karabakh declared itself as an independent republic, further escalating the conflict into a full-scale war. About 30,000 people lost their lives and more than 1 million fled their homes until a Russian-brokered ceasefire was signed in 1994. However, small-scale fighting has never stopped. The Minsk Group, which has been attempting to broker an end to the dispute, will meet on Tuesday. But many years of meetings have yielded little in the way of results, with the members holding very different positions. How to resolve the conflict remains in question.
For more on the Nagorno-Karabakh clash, in the studio today we have in Beijing Mr. Cui Hongjian, who is the director of the Department for European Studies at the China Institute for International Studies. Welcome, sir. Meanwhile, joining us from London, we have Mr. Lukas Kulesa, who is a research director at the European Leadership Network. We are hoping that we are also going to have some Russian guests joining us later in our program. But for now, let me talk to the two of you. Mr. Kulesa, how dangerous do you think was the conflict on Saturday? Of course, more than 30 people were being killed, and many suggest this is the one with the heaviest artillery being used ever since the armistice.
Exactly. It seems to be the heaviest incident, the heaviest fighting in 22 years. Of course, in a situation like this, it's very difficult to speculate because there is a certain mechanism on the ground of escalation. So one side says it's ceasefire, but then doesn't stop fighting, so the other side responds. So it is serious. On both sides we had very aggressive, bellicose statement at the very beginning. So hopefully we will go towards de-escalation, but I can't really exclude the possibility of this escalating into something much more dangerous.
Of course, it immediately attracted the attention, the world's spotlight. But at this moment, both sides claim they have already de-escalated the tension. They have already subscribed to the ceasefire, at least from their side. But nobody knows exactly what is going on over there, because this could be quite a tricky issue to figure out which from which.
Yes, exactly. Even now, just like you mentioned, both sides announced there will be some de-escalation, especially from Azerbaijan, just to have a unilateral ceasefire to this conflict. But so far, I think that there will be more problem even, because as we heard, this continue. I mean, for this conflict, the problem is I think that. It's difficult to say who will trigger the first shot on this conflict, but I think firstly, as we know, there's a long history behind this conflict. Even there's, I mean, unended conflicts since the last century, and even in the last year, it was reported there were nearly 3,000 conflicts in different sizes between two countries in the last year.
So this is only a crystallization of exactly
Sure.
what happened over
Yes.
the past few years. And now we are told that we're having Mr. Pavel Felgenhauer, who is a current affairs commentator coming from Moscow. Mr. Felgenhauer, welcome to our program. Of course, President Putin, coming from Russia, has already called for the ceasefire between the two sides, Armenia and Azerbaijan. And yet, Mr. Felgenhauer, many suggest the role of Moscow is very tricky. On the one hand, Moscow sells weapons to both countries, which might be used in the conflict. Secondly, Moscow now is calling for the ceasefire. And this is a story of related to the leftover of the former Soviet Union. So help us to understand, Mr. Felgenhauer, what exactly is going on here?
Well, for Russia, the strategic long-term objective in the region is most likely to restore Soviet time domination in Transcaucasia, which is seen as an essential part of Russian interests in the region, which means that Russia would want to have close relations with all three Transcaucasian nations, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. So Moscow was trying to balance its relations with Armenia and with the Azeris, with Baku, and trying to exclude other outside powers to have much influence in the region. This is a very complicated political juggle. It's also important to know that in Moscow there is a strong Armenian lobby. Armenians were prominent in Soviet times, in post-Soviet times, in the Russian bureaucracy, and today in business. And there's also, of course, the Azeri lobby that's also rather influential. And there are those who support in the Russian bureaucracy closer ties to Armenia, but also those who support closer ties to Azerbaijan. So all in all, of course, right now Moscow is saying there should be peace and everyone should calm down and stop firing. But if that's not happening, it's hard for Russia to move further. It's going to be quite a dilemma. Does Russia intervene with more force? That may trigger, say, a Turkish incursion into the conflict. It's a very dangerous situation.
It is a very dangerous situation, Mr. Felgenhauer. That's why I want to ask you, at this stage, which you mentioned a little bit earlier as well, how much weight does Russia's words still carry to these two countries? Oh, I know in Azerbaijan, Russia still have a small military base over there, but in Armenia rather, but in Azerbaijan it's a very different story, because Azerbaijan seems to be getting ever closer over the past 2 decades since the collapse of the former Soviet Union, ever to the Western countries. So how much does Russia's words really carry?
Well, of course, Russia has influence, but this conflict right now, though many in post-Soviet countries, from Kiev, I've heard that word, and from other places, and from Turkey, that believe that Russia is really to blame and somehow organized this flare-up. It's not so, and Russian influence is there, but it's to some extent limited. This conflict right now is fed by local sources. There's internal problems, very serious, in Azerbaijan and in Armenia. A lot of public discontent. So a kind of more clashes on the ceasefire line could lead to a patriotic rallying of the public opinion in both Armenia and Azerbaijan, which is basically good for the governments there. So this is an internal kind of very much fueled flare-up where Moscow does not have so much a say. The problem is that this internally maybe fueled flare-up can get totally out of control, and we can get a regional war on our hands.
And that's the concern, isn't it, Mr. Kulesa? I mean, on the one hand, it could be local source leading to specifically this conflict, and yet all the onlookers are paying very close attention with very different agenda. For example, Russia, Turkey, and also the so-called the Minsk group, which also includes the United States and some of the Western countries. Tell us, what about that at this stage? Let's go to Mr. Kulesa first.
Thank you. And if I were to describe the general moods, it's of course concerned, but primarily it is surprise. Simply with so many things on the plate for the major European countries and the United States. And you can start with Ukraine, then go to Syria, and then go to the migration crisis. Nobody seemed to pay that much attention to South Caucasus and Nagorno-Karabakh in particular. So right now there is a very nervous, I think, period in which everybody is first of all appealing for calm, but then trying to figure out how to put pressure on both the parties to de-escalate and to go to the ceasefire again. And so at that point, of course, there are some who are looking for all sorts of conspiracy theories, that some say it's all Moscow's doing, as we heard from Mr. Felgenhauer a minute ago. Some say it was all orchestrated by Turkey. Some are pointing the finger at different directions whatsoever, but it is more likely that the whole thing is a matter bilateral between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And according to the information that we have, it seems that indeed, especially on the Azeri side, President Aliyev and the leadership might have thought that this is a good tactical victory to rally the people around the regime.
Well, whether that is the intention or not, we do not know at this stage, or any way to specifically judge. But Mr. Kulesa, one thing is very clear, that all parties have expressed their concerns, at least. Russia, EU, also you got Iran, Turkey. These are big players. And when you have all of these players paying attention to and possibly involving in a conflict, that is something really worth some thoughts. What do you think about the potential of this conflict on the border escalating itself to something even more worrisome?
Well, if I may say very shortly that we are desperately looking for this kind of situation internationally in which our interests, the interests of the United States, European countries, Russia, and China most likely align. And this seems to be one of such cases in which each of these players would have plenty to lose if the situation gets out of control, but at the same time we would all gain a lot if we together manage through diplomacy to put this conflict again under some kind of control. So I see here, yes, a big danger, but also an opportunity.
Much possibility to work together? Mr. Cui, the Minsk group, there has been a lot of talk about it recently because it is a mechanism and yet it hasn't really worked much for any of the conflict, because we understand since the collapse of former Soviet Union, the Minsk group later was established, and yet it has not necessarily solved the hundreds of different sizes of conflicts on border among the former republics of the former Soviet Union.
Yeah, now it looks like now almost every, all parties say that, okay, then, for everybody, okay, there will be no more conflict between two countries because it's out of the interest of all party, of course, except for the, announcement from Turkey.
It makes sense, but until the realities arise.
Yes, exactly. So of course now here is a Minsk group. It looks like the mechanism to help the de-escalation of the situation. But another problem is, if we understand how it's a complicated situation there, maybe more pessimistic about the future. For example, how about this different, situation from past, especially. Now we do have the Ukrainian crisis, and still, very, very kind of a deadlock situation between U.S., Russia, and the European Union in a part of that region. And also, we mentioned the South Caucasus. South Caucasus used to be regarded as a very, very big resources for any kind of instability and conflicts. So now the problem is, once those one of these big players, they want to get something from this conflict, that there will be maybe further conflicts because it could be used by some big players.
Therefore, Mr. Falkenhauer, in the former Soviet Union, there were a lot of republics. Since the collapse of it, some of the border problems continue even today. The Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict is only one of them. This is the time to ask about the leftovers of the former Soviet Union. How well have those border issues been discussed and resolved? In this case, there's only armistice. There's not specific final agreement. So what do you make of the reality, given this example of something happened between Armenia and Azerbaijan?
Well, the borders of the Soviet republics were drawn under Joseph Stalin rather artificially. No one believed that these borders will ever become real state borders, or that someone's going to be fighting on those to change them. They were kind of administrative borders, like between different American states. And when they transformed into state borders, that created lots of problems of divided people, of divided tribes. There's problems between Russia and Azerbaijan because there's a divided Lizgin people. There's many other kind of problems. Georgia and Russia. There's Armenian inhabited parts of Georgia also. And there's the Nakhichevan, there are different kind of enclaves. These borders can only function if it's a kind of very, very friendly relations when they are not that important. When they become important, that creates very serious problems in Central Asia too. These borders are almost unworkable in a kind of if they become international, and that has been creating problems all over the former Soviet Union, and there doesn't seem to be much of a let-up. There's this there's almost war between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, there's a ceasefire in the Donbass, but still there's a confrontation. Yeah. So there's a number of confrontation going on at the same time on these borders, and more may follow.
Right, exactly. And just add to the complexity over there, there's also the ethnic and also religious issue. Azerbaijan, mainly Muslims. Armenia, mainly Christians. And you also have different ethnic groups in those two countries while they are having some disputed borders. How complicated do you think a final solution could be sought? Who would play that role?
Well, right now there does not seem to be a real final solution for the Armenian-Azeri conflict. There were lots of... So the ceasefire there was holding more or less since '94, though there were increasingly clashes. I mean, this flare-up right now didn't come out of the blue. The level of violence was slowly growing, and then it went over the top. There's been lots of negotiations. There have been meetings between the presidents of Azerbaijan and Armenia, brokered by Moscow. They didn't lead nowhere. Right now there's a total deadlock on overall political solution, and this is leading, of course, to violence. And this is also a very complicated situation, not just simply Christians against Muslims. There's the Iranian factor that wasn't today mentioned. Iran is actually an ally of Armenia, when Azerbaijan right now is very much supported by Israel, and there's Israeli military specialists arming and training the Azeri military right now. So it's much more complicated than it can be easily described in a short program.
Yes, indeed. And Mr. Cui, we've got a lot of things going on here. Religious issue, ethnic issue I mentioned earlier. Border conflicts already there for decades. And now you also have the economic challenges facing some of the countries, Armenia, for example, particularly with Russia being also sanctioned by some of the Western countries. Armenia, as a close ally, also suffered to a certain extent. Azerbaijan, no exception either, with its oil prices going down globally. So all of these very complex factors mixed together, are we going to see a very similar example of Ukraine? That's the biggest concern.
Yes, exactly. I think that's also the reason why now we're worrying about this conflict between those two countries. Will make maybe more complicated situations in that part of the region, and it will become another Ukraine, because as we understand, some gaming of big players behind of this conflict, and also collecting with some difficult domestic situation in Armenia, and also, you know, an imbalance situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And also because we know that the reach of energy, especially in Azerbaijan, and also it's in the path from the Caspian Sea to the Western countries. So it become the very, very hot point for every big players, especially between European Union, United States, Russia. Everybody or every player want to have some influence and want to win something from that part.
They're over there. Yes, Mr. Cui. Mr. Kulesa, you heard what the other two's arguments are. How much danger are we going to see a repetition of what Ukraine was like before it ran into the biggest conflict? Is this region facing a danger of having another Ukraine? Also, given the fact that the Ukraine crisis has not been resolved at all, have we learned any lesson that we can help to, in a way, put things back into its track for this border conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan? Mr. Kulesa.
Well, in general, I would be rather careful to draw parallels between Ukraine and Nagorno-Karabakh. There are simply too many differences in terms of history, situation right now, and the potential implications. But interestingly, a lot of experts were predicting that Ukraine would end up, as Nagorno-Karabakh, would end up in a state of a conflict which is sometimes frozen, sometimes unfrozen. So it's very interesting that right now we're saying maybe Nagorno-Karabakh would end up as Ukraine. So I think in terms of the lessons learned is that there is no such a thing as a frozen conflict. If you just go for a ceasefire, then it may last for a month. It may even last for 22 years. But sooner or later, if you don't address the underlying causes of the problem, and if you don't push the sides which are there towards a lasting solution, then sooner or later we will go back to the conflict. So I would say the lesson is that we should not be just happy with a ceasefire, and even if we go back to the situation before Friday in Nagorno-Karabakh, all sides should rethink their policy. We mentioned the Minsk group. I'm not sure if having US, Russia and France only is the best solution. Maybe we need something which includes European Union, Iran, and a couple of other players. So my general conclusion is that don't just go for the ceasefire, think about the underlying causes of the crisis, both in Ukraine and in Azeri-Armenian relations.
Solve the core challenge. That is the issue that we really need to face. Sometimes, even though it's challenging, but we have to do that. Thank you so much. Lucas Kulesa joining us from London, Pavel Felgenhauer from Russia, and also Mr. Cui Hongjian here in Beijing. Nagorno-Karabakh, we hope that conflict will really de-escalate. Thank you. Really appreciate it, gentlemen, for being with us. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. China's Qingming Tomb Sweeping Day. Join us for a discussion about tradition and ceremony as families across the country remember their departed loved ones. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News, coming to you from Beijing. Monday is China's Qingming Festival, also known as Tomb Sweeping Day. Qingming dates back more than 2,500 years. On this day, people pay their respects to ancestors by cleaning tombstones, removing weeds, and adding fresh soil to graves. Qingming is also one of the 24 days that divide the solar year on the Chinese calendar, heralding both the change of seasons and what would have been the beginning of plowing and sowing in traditional farming culture. Kite flying, family outings, and special feasts are also part of this annual festival. Let's take a look at this tradition in our modern society.
A time for remembering ancestors. Qingming, also known as Tomb Sweeping Day, falls on April 4th this year. The day has traditionally been a time to hold memorial ceremonies for deceased ancestors. For those Chinese who have moved away, the long weekend is a chance to travel home. China's railway authorities expect train trips in the country to hit 41.08 million during this year's 4-day travel rush for Tomb Sweeping Day. Over the holiday, the Beijing International Airport transports more than 270,000 people each day, almost as many as during Chinese New Year. Expressways and roads linking major graveyards have also faced heavy traffic in recent days. Chinese tradition holds that the dead should be buried, but the custom has put a strain on the populous country's land resources.
There's nearly 70,000 square meters of land for public cemetery in Shanghai. With 65,000 traditional tombs added every year, most public cemetery will be full in 5 years.
To deal with the problem, the Chinese government has been promoting eco-friendly burials, including sea burials and tree funerals.
My father asked me to let the ocean be his final destination. I respect his choice, and it's my filial duty to scatter his ashes here.
But many Chinese have been resistant to the new type of burial. Most still prefer a traditional tomb.
Tradition is dominating the market. New methods such as ecological funerals are increasing in popularity fast, but still hold a very small share compared to traditional funerals.
As cemeteries fill up, providing people decent ways to bury and honor their ancestors will be increasingly important.
For more on the Qingming Festival Tomb Sweeping Day traditions, I'm joined here in the Beijing studio, two panelists. Professor Qingming from the American Studies Center at Beijing Foreign Studies University. Together, we're not talking about American studies, but rather Chinese tradition studies. Right. Okay, there we go. And also we have Mr. Rick Dunham, visiting scholar and co-director of Global Business Journalist Program at Tsinghua University, originally coming from the United States. So, gentlemen, this is a Qingming Day, Tomb Sweeping Day. Thinking about the ancestors, but at the same time, it's also a celebration of the spirits of the ancestors. So let me ask you about, first of all, a very practical issue. Chinese population, ever increasing. Both of you know very well of this. Aging also. So even the land for the buried would not be enough. There's a lot of advocacy about cremation, about tree burial, and many other different types of burials. Do you think, according to Chinese tradition, will those become ever popular?
No, I don't think so. I think right now, as far as I can see, there's a general backlash against this very new way of burying the deceased in the family.
Tree burial, sea burial.
The sea, and also sometimes the wall burial instead of the sea, stuff like that. But I do see a kind of progress. I do see a change of a mentality, and because according to this ChinaNews.com survey, almost 65% of people agree that they will participate in this kind of a new way of burial. And personally, and very interestingly, my mom says that she wants to be buried the new way. I mean, instead of going to the cemetery so far away from us, she wants to be close to us. And she wants to say that to be buried at the riverbank, close to our home, which is very touching, which I think that the new idea is striking almost like a root among the general consciousness of the public.
But you know, Professor Teng, filial piety is being regarded as one of the most important virtues of Chinese culture, even though these days modern society has changed so much. We are not living yearly under one roof with our elders, but rather having separate families, the so-called nuclear families. But still, by tradition, it's a big thing, particularly for the afterlife in a way. So even though your mother was talking about it, does she really mean it, first of all? And secondly, will children like you feel that acceptable?
Well, she, I think, would mean it, but I don't think. I mean, I'm afraid I can't accept that. I mean, maybe until now, I still have second thought about burying the loved ones in the family. I mean, in that manner, I think there must be a way out to some kind of seek a golden means, let me say, some kind of compromise. And so, yes, I mean, it's going to be a very, very big challenge. I mean, especially towards those people living in small towns, especially in rural countryside, where the practice of burying and cremation and burial that way, I mean, by seeking a large burial ground, it's so very much prevailing. I mean, and has such a long history in China. And so I'm kind of pretty much kind of caught in this very conflict of ideas.
Mr. Dunham, you heard about the personal story and the sophisticated analysis coming from Professor Teng. What do you make of it? I mean, on the one hand, there is a reality issue that the land is just not enough, and it's getting ever more expensive for an average household in China. But on the other hand, here's the filial piety, the tradition, and there's also the so-called family values being carried further by having a tomb, by having a special place for those who passed away. So, Mr. Dunham, being here in China, what do you think of this conflict?
I think the only way it can be resolved is public discussion, discourse over time. I mean, I think it may take 10 or 20 years for society to change, if it changes at all. I've seen changes in the United States and in Europe. Some of it the same reality-based changes. In a city like New York, there is not room.
That's right.
And so people have figured out different ways. It's almost like supply and demand for space, and it's changed society over the past half century. I think similar things could happen in China, but the deep feelings about families and burials are deeper in China than they are in Western Europe or in the United States.
That's true, and that poses a more challenging question for the Chinese.
Well, absolutely. Once again, I mean, the land scarcity, I mean, in this case, is extremely kind of troublesome and frustrating for both the nation and also the people living in this very nation. Look at the suburbs we have. Look at the arable lands that we have so far. I mean, it is increasingly a kind of a warning, dire warning to the people of this country if we want to feed the people of this very country with these arable lands. And so I think this is high time that we rethink about burying our loved ones, I mean, solely through cremation, and also seeking a land plot so that they can bury and can be seen on every Qingming festival.
I've been to so many occasions in which I pay respect for my ancestors, you will see in the suburbs of Beijing, these places just mushrooming from one to the other because of the huge demand in the market. And this is a tradition, and therefore every time when it's tomb sweeping day, you see huge traffic jams near some of the most important monuments and also these burial place, cremation places in China, and also in the major cities as well. You might think major cities, their culture probably has changed so much, but actually when it comes to these fundamental traditions, it really hasn't that much, really. It's a very interesting social issue over there. Having said that, this is only part of the discussion for the tomb sweeping day. The other part of the discussion, Mr. Denham, of course, is about what kind of ceremony are we going to practice these days to pay our respect for the ancestors. The Chinese are very much a pragmatic society, shall we say, burning fake money or the paper money to pay respect for the previous generation seems to be the way, and together with many other ways, you know, building paper bowls, even paper TV sets, paper Apple phones, you know, all of that.
Stuff, right.
Paper homes, paper farms, all of these. So, but these, of course, were part of the tradition. And yet, when you examine it now, you feel sometimes it's ridiculous. Sometimes you could also understand it. So how should we understand and look at these kind of phenomena? On the one hand, you want to carry forward the tradition. On the other hand, you really don't want to get into those, not necessarily the best practices. Mr. Denham.
Well, I look at this as a religious practice, and my comparison would be toward Christian or Jewish or Muslim practice. And I mean, with Christianity, you have drinking the blood of Christ, and you know, if you think of that literally, it sounds ridiculous. But people drink a cup of wine or have a wafer, and it's symbolic. And you know, even though sometimes people will say, you know, that you should be more realistic, and that these things are superstitions of the past. I think that these kinds of societal traditions should be respected and just not taken literally.
Superstitious vis-a-vis cultural tradition. How can we judge which specifically belongs to which category? That is the question.
Well, to me, I think tradition are to be respected. In a modern era, I believe every modern man should respect tradition, but at the same time, we should look beyond this tradition, and we should guard against this very superstition, this superstitious stuff.
But what counts as tradition? What belongs to so-called the superstition?
Well,
of course, that's a very hard divide.
Yeah,
isn't it?
well, absolutely. I mean, by burning fake money, I mean, this is basically a superstitious practice, even though it's a long, deeply rooted practice. I mean, by fake burning money, well, they say, according to this practice, I mean, or the practitioners so far, I mean, it's supposed to be for people living in the afterlife and to be rich and to be wealthy. But it was not true. It's never true. I mean, in fact, I mean, we never know that a person can live a wealthy, happy life in the afterlife. I mean, being born, educated.
We're getting already into a philosophical discussion about what's going to happen in the afterlife. We don't want to do that because that would really take a long of time.
It will.
But the thing is, for China, it's a rapidly developing economy, rapidly changing society. Sometimes people get confused as to what are the things they should still get hold of when it comes to tradition, when it comes to the best part of their culture. What part of things they should actually put aside and think about the future? I think that is the fundamental question we were having this discussion today. Professor Tang, you've been studying American culture, even though that's a culture much shorter than China's. But still, cultural comparisons sometimes could help us to understand better about who we are, what we are about, and where we are heading for.
Well, absolutely. I think through this very comparative study, I kind of come to realize that I mean, a Memorial Day or a Qingming festival could be very much kind of identical, both in terms of it's a day of remembering, it's a day of remembrance, it's a day for mourning and also to express our love. But then we just cannot constrain ourselves to the love of only your loved ones in this family, but I think we should perhaps extend our love to all humanity by respecting the land, by respecting the planet Earth that we are going to inherit, because it's going to be handed over to our future posterity.
Yeah. It is not the first time, the second time, or third time people discuss this. It is also not the first time, second time, or third time that people talk about tombstones. You know, how much culture really is there on the tombstones? How much will that be an inheritance for the generations to come to read and also to reflect upon? But these are all part of the culture related to so-called afterlife, and also part of a culture of remembering the previous generation. So, Mr. Dunham, putting aside the so-called cultural differences, what do you think should be the real essence of this day? The day of remembering our past generations, the day of having them as inspirations for us to go further.
Well, I think you just said one of the word, inspirations. I think, to me, the remembering is remembering what people told you, their example for you in your life and the future, how they inspired you, the words, and to remember them and the good things they did and even the mistakes that they made and how it can make you a better person. Also, I think that a big part of Qingming Festival is the coming of spring, and that's something that is true in almost all culture. There are festivals for that. So I think it's the same thing, to look forward to the coming of the harvest and the year ahead.
Professor Tang?
Well, absolutely. I'm looking forward to this clear and bright day. I mean, it's Qingming in China, right? But so far, I think that we still have to ask someone, and the person that I'm going to ask, it is very cowherd in Du Mu's poem, right? Remember that very day, but it's a sad day. But then I'm hoping to see it as a happy day, and I'm going to look for this apricot flower.
What exactly in Du Mu's poem?
And
explain it for our international viewers.
And that poem points to us to this almost like an interesting, clear, bright utopia. I mean, but that utopia got a name, and the name is the apricot flower village.
All right.
And I'm heading for that flower village.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
Looking forward. Thank you so much, Professor Tang Qingming and Mr. Rick Dunham. Really appreciate it for being with us. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.